When you tear down your own history, expect to get smushed. That is the lesson that the left taught us yesterday. It's a very important lesson. I don't think they meant to teach us this. I don't think they meant for all this symbolism, but that is what happened when they literally pulled the statue down, and it literally smushed one of the rioters. This happened in Virginia. It's a very sad story. It is actually a genuinely sad story all around, every single part of it. A bunch of these leftist goons went around, the American Taliban, tied a rope around a statue, pulled it down, and they didn't expect the statue was going to hit them on the head. Let's take a listen. So they've got the statue here. They're all very excited. They're pulling it down. It goes down, and their excitement turns to terror in just a moment because they realize that the statue has crushed one of their own guys. Get a medic, get a medic. All of a sudden, by the way, all of a sudden they want the services of the state, the cops, the ambulance, the EMT, all of that, because it has crushed them. All the other statues around this had been beheaded in the moments just before they pulled this one down. Few takeaways. There are no cops stopping these guys, right? Of course not. If I were a cop, I wouldn't want to stop them either because there's no institutional support for the police. Another big takeaway, we are tearing down our history to liberate us, but the destruction of our traditions will actually kill us. All that and more. I'm Michael Knowles. This is The Michael Knowles Show. When I saw the Columbus statue come down, I realized this is about a lot more than Black Lives Mattering. Okay, this is about a lot more than George Floyd. This is about a lot more than police brutality. My first question was, what does Christopher Columbus have to do with Black Lives Matter or the police in 2020? Obviously nothing. He has nothing to do with it. What this is about, ultimately, is an attack on our very civilization, on Western civilization. This has been building among the left for a very long time. You saw it really start to come to fruition in the 70s and 80s in the United States, where you had Jesse Jackson marching on college campuses, leading kids in chants that said, hey, hey, ho, ho, Western civ has got to go. Western culture's got to go. Radicals are tearing things down, not for principles, but for power. You think, and they want you to think, that they are tearing these things down because they hate them per se, but it's not that. The left here hates this specific civilization they're tearing down. So, for instance, they tear down history not because they oppose all history, it's because they oppose our history. They tear down churches not because they oppose religion. In a way, politics is religion for them. So they do like a certain kind of religion. They just don't like our religion, okay? They tear down the government not because they oppose government, but because they oppose our government. They have their own governments, which we'll see in a moment. They abolish the police not because they hate the police, even, but because they hate our police. And guess what's going to happen the minute they get into power? They're going to set up their own governments and their own police, and trust me, those governments and those police are going to be a lot less just than our own. You saw this in Seattle. So in Seattle right now, Antifa radicals have set up an autonomous zone. They're calling it the City Hall Autonomous Zone, or Chaz. This is an area where the civil authority in Seattle and the cops and the mayor and everybody else have lost power. They are not running those streets anymore. And you've got these leftist radicals now running the streets. And the thing that's so ironic about it, they talk about how they want to open borders. They talk about how they want to abolish the police. What's the first thing these guys do the minute they take any power in the city? They set up rigid borders. They don't let people in. And they set up their own system of cops. Obviously, it exposes them as total hypocrites. Situation that you want to be in, because if you're one of these utopians, one of these radical communists or anarchists who think that abolishing the police means abolishing the police, well, you're in for a rude awakening, because when you abolish the police, all that means is that a new set of police are going to come in. When you abolish the government, all that really means is that a new government is going to come in. There's a line about communists, which is that Christians go to heaven and socialists go to communism. What they mean by that is you're not going to get there on earth, at least, okay? This is utopian vision that as long as we're in a fallen world is not going to exist. And so these leftist dreams of abolishing the state, abolishing the police, it can't happen. That's why every communist or socialist regime that's ever come around maintains a tight grip on power. The police don't go a little lighter, they go a lot harder when you get these regimes. The state doesn't fall away, the state becomes much, much more important. The Seattle police abandoned this precinct, okay? And what they're now receiving, according to Como News out there, is that they're getting reports of armed people manning the checkpoints, intimidating people trying to enter, and people committing extortion. You have now got, as always happens with these revolutionaries, these insurrectionists, you've got a politics much less just, much less equitable, much less prosperous taking its place. That should terrify all of us.
I have to admit, I am now turning from bemusement to amusement as an autonomous zone. They are calling it the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, has been set up in Seattle. Protesters have taken over apparently a 6 or 7 block radius in Seattle and have declared their own state. They've actually put up a sign. It says, "You are now leaving the USA." Not kidding. The Capitol Hill Free Zone, they call it the Autonomous Zone, is a protester-occupied zone. Okay, it's sort of like the Occupy Wall Street routine that we saw a few years back in about 2010. And it is going to end up exactly the same way. It happened because the police were told by Mayor Jenny Durkan to essentially withdraw from the area and to cede the area to the cops. And it's turned into a raucous comedy almost immediately. Now, I think that a lot of people across the United States are feeling that things have grown out of control just a little bit. That no matter how much you believe that police brutality is wrong, and everyone who is good believes this, and no matter how much you believe racism is wrong, and you don't have to protest to believe that racism is wrong, it's kind of weird that we are now talking openly about a complete takeover of a major part of a major city by protesters against the police, where apparently, according to the cops, some extortion is going on. The protesters have built walls. They've gone full Trump, guys. They've gone full authoritarian, according to the left, right? They've built walls, not kidding. They actually built a wall to keep people out. They took over the East Precinct of the Seattle Police Department. They called it the Seattle People's Department, which is, I'm really enjoying this live showing on continuous loop of The Dark Knight Rises. It's really exciting stuff. They set up physical barriers. They apparently have armed people patrolling the physical barriers. Apparently, they are stopping and frisking people who are entering. I'm not kidding about this. They are stopping and frisking people who are entering. And this was to get rid of the cops, guys. This was to get rid of the evil, horrible Seattle Police Department. And immediately upon that happening, people in there were like, oh, you mean now there's power that's up for grabs? It turns out that anarchy is usually a pretext for tyranny. Chaos is usually a pretext for terrible people taking over. And so, according to multiple reports, essentially a warlord is taking over. I mean, we're going to get Escape from New York, except it's Escape from Seattle. We're going to send in Snake Plissken. All that has to happen here is for Air Force One to be downed inside the sea, boarded the place up, and they left. And thus was born a new nation, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or Chaz for short, which the country of Chaz, a place where progressives can indulge in some of the most humiliating stereotype of left-wing protest subculture. According to reports, by early Tuesday, demonstrators had established a perimeter with improvised barriers and deputized scouts. In the afternoon, the No Cop Co-op popped up, slinging kebabs, snacks, and free water to passers-by. A teach-in square was established at the intersection of 12th and Pine. We get like a full Maoist regime here. Tents were pitched near the precinct, where people were encouraged to stay throughout the night, or even just for 2 or 3 hours to hold the space. By nightfall, they'd built their own outdoor cinema. The crowd was energized to build connections. People spoke about investing in black-owned banks, divesting from corporations, and prison reform. One speaker issued a warning about the American Legislative Exchange Council, quote, a group of usually white men from major corporations who don't know our issues and make laws. Protesters hung a banner on the East Precinct that read, property of the people, according to KOMO, which is one of the local stations. And there are plenty of photos available. There's even a map replete with labels like regime-occupied Safeway. Regime-occupied Safeway. Solid stuff, guys. Really good stuff. Now, people inside, come on, this is beyond parody. It's like the right wing made this up. Honestly, it's as though it came from the fever dream of Tom Wolfe. I mean, that's what it feels like. Activists who are claiming to have helped create the police no-go zone in Seattle are now asking for food from the outside. There's an activist who tweeted out, the homeless people we invited took away all the food at the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. You got rid of law and order, and then the homeless people came and took all your food. Because you're communists, and this is what happens, you stupid communists. It's delicious. It's delicious. Again, my bemusement, so my outrage at the destruction of law and order turned to bemusement as I watched the mayor of Seattle cave to all of this, and now it has turned to full-scale amusement as the thing turns into a predictable debacle. According to one of the anarchists over there, we need more food to keep the area operational. Please, if possible, bring, you ready for this? Vegan meat substitutes. Fruits, oats, soy products, etc. Anything to help us eat. Yes, they're starving in there because they don't have the Morningstar Farms vegan breakfast products. We need those in there right now. This 18-year-old activist appears to be a transgender woman and self-described lesbian anarchist, according to her now private Twitter account. Well done, everybody. Well, I mean, this is... And so what are the authorities doing about this? Because there are actual businesses and, people who are not crazy who live here. So what are they doing about this? Nothing. Had a reporter on the scene yesterday explaining what was going on inside this brand new country, Chaz, the country of Chaz. It's so good. Okay, so here's the reporter from Fox News on Tucker Carlson's show last night.
A local station got video of several guards armed with assault rifles. They are asking for identification before letting people in, and police have received reports of the armed guards demanding money from some businesses inside their area. We also saw people passing out food in what they call a no-cop co-op, and they made a long list of demands. We have a full screen to show you at least some of them. Among them, abolish the Seattle Police Department and the court system, disarm all cops until they are all fired, and abolish youth jails. The mayor's office did not respond to our request for...
They're allowing these crazies to take over. This is a place where taxpayers live. This is a place where taxpayers live. So how's your whole abolish the police thing going if you're living in that area? Is it going well for you? By the way, some of the signs around the area are things like, the cops will always be racist because capitalism requires inequality. Okay, so you would imagine that there are no cops now, right? I mean, this is the whole point, is to get rid of the cops. Wrong you are. Wrong you are. The cops are there. They're just not called cops. So according to Reddit, people have been posting on Reddit what exactly is going on. There's a person named Raz Simone. Raz Simone is a rapper. Apparently he has been distributing his rap mixtape to... It's so good. It's from a guy called Wizard of the Future over at Reddit. Raz's crew is self-appointed, heavily armed, has indicated their intention to police the area and has engaged in the use of force. I am unaware of any rival street force of their stature expressing the desire to hold authority in the area. The power of vacuum has apparently been filled. And apparently, people are tweeting out things like, Raz is becoming the very thing people didn't want to begin with. There's a video that is out of the people working with Raz Simone in which they are confronting people who are graffitiing. Now, apparently, they only want certain places graffiti because there are certain allies and they don't want their businesses graffitied. So weird. They want to protect the property of people who they are allied with. But I thought that private property is bad, guys. So they walk up to some people who are graffitiing. These are people who apparently work for Raz Simone, allegedly work for Raz Simone. And the exchange is just glorious. Because remember, this whole thing started about the evils of police brutality and authoritarianism. And literally, you now have an armed force of people in this Seattle communist area telling people, we are the police now, and I will blow your brains out if you resist. So police brutality went away for that long, apparently. And by the way, Seattle cops aren't doing that. Seattle cops are not doing that. These are the woke initiates. The woke army has arrived. I want to start a GoFundMe today. Any woke white liberals who are working for mainstream media outlets, if you wish to relocate to Chaz, to the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, I will help pay your way. If you pledge that you will stay there, everybody, just really, really good stuff. By the way, Raz Simone apparently announced that people entering ought to be stopped and frisked. Remember when stop and frisk was a bad thing? Because it was the cops, right? The cops were bad. According to the whole story, Raz Simone, a Seattle local, stated he belongs to the People's Force, a replacement for Seattle PD. On June 8th in a live video, he advised that unfamiliar faces should be stopped, questioned, and checked to see if they are armed. Which is literally the definition of stop and frisk. Which is racist, right? I mean, stop and frisk is bad. We can't do it. That said, her department and other city departments are trying to find the leaders of the Chaz to negotiate a roadmap for the area's immediate future. You know what this roadmap should be? The cops never left. That would be the roadmap. By the way, they are damn lucky that Janet Reno isn't Attorney General right now. If this were a bunch of white Branch Davidians in Texas, their compound would be burned out by now, right? But now, because this is the woke initiates, we're just going to allow a 6-block radius in the center of the biggest city in Washington state to be taken over. Nolet said, while Washington is an open carry state, there's no legal right for those to be used, those arms to be used to intimidate community members, because apparently they're trying to intimidate people trying to enter. She said operating a citizen checkpoint on a public street is illegal. She said, we've heard anecdotally of citizens and businesses being asked to pay a fee to operate within this area. So there are reports of an actual shakedown happening inside the area. Why it seems as though the communist/anarchist takeover is not all it's cracked up to be. I don't feel like injustice is being cured, guys. I don't feel like this is going well. By the way, what is the city of Seattle doing about all of this? They've staffed porta potties there. They've granted all the protesters porta potties. They've put garbage cans and portable toilets in the vicinity for use by demonstrators. The demonstrators, by the way, are also showing, they put up a big movie screen and they're showing Ava DuVernay's 13th documentary from Netflix about how the prison system is evil. And then Ava DuVernay, Don Lemon suggesting that he doesn't have to provide evidence for his claim because after all, he's a black man in America who's experienced bad things. And that means that anybody who says differently on a systemic level, he's not, again, people are not trying to debunk claims that you on an anecdotal level have had bad experiences with the cops. People are pointing out that overall, there is no evidence that the police are disproportionately shooting black people in proportion to criminal activity, or that the police are systemically racist, right? The evidence for this is extraordinarily scanty. But if you say that, then apparently that's white-splaining, according to Don Lemon. And so you will be made to repent. You must repent.
White men denying the existence of systemic racism, that is the essence of white entitlement. We do not need their permission or their sign-off on what we know to be true and what we have lived. That is white mansplaining. How can you solve this problem, the systemic racism that is killing people of color, if you won't even admit there is a problem?
Well, how do you solve a problem when you won't even define the problem? Because when you say systemic racism is killing people of color, that is the most vague statement I could possibly imagine. How about you name the policy that's killing people of color, or you name the person who's killing people of color, and then we can talk about it. I mean, you could literally fill in the phrase systemic racism there with blah, blah is killing people of color. Like, I don't know what that means. Explain to me what that means, and then I can help. But I can't help if you're just going to shout systemic racism, and then when you say, okay, what do you mean by that? Can you clarify what policy you're talking about? Oh, if you don't understand, it's because you're just white. Come on. Come on. Now, the good news is that we are living full-scale George Orwell at this point. We're literally changing terms in the dictionary. Also, we are watching the tear down of statues. And these statues are being torn down on the simple basis, not that the Confederacy was bad, which it was, and evil. We're talking about tearing down statues of Columbus. We're talking about tearing down statues of the Founding Fathers, right? This is the point is the broader destruction of American history.
That if I drove into town right now and I threw a brick in a window, or I set a retail outlet on fire, or I looted a convenience store, or I invaded a police precinct, or I tried to set up my own autonomous zone, my own sovereign state in the middle of the street, or if I yanked down a statue or a monument because I found it personally displeasing, I would be arrested on the spot with very little fanfare. And if I resisted arrest and I was beaten or even killed by police in the process, even if my death was unjust or the result of excessive force, there would be no CNN headlines about it. No riots in my honor. No elaborate displays of performative grief from our elected officials in Washington. Nobody kneeling in moments of silence. None of that. Whatever my white privilege gets me, it does not get me that. HBO's streaming service, as you've heard, took down Gone with the Wind, the classic film, took it down from its platform because one correct thinking individual wrote an op-ed instructing them to do so. And so they did. This is on the same day that Webster's dictionary edited its definition of racism because a young black woman emailed and said they should. They apparently got one email and said, all right, I'll change the definition if you say so. These are just the most recent examples of leftist privilege. We haven't even discussed the many extravagant concessions that the LGBT lobby has been able to extract including allowing men access to women's bathrooms, locker rooms, sports teams, while shaming and silencing any women who express discomfort over this invasion of their privacy. Allowed to do that. I have to demonstrate my allegiance to the leftist tribe. I have to have the right, quote unquote, right views. I have to say the right things. I have to hold the right opinions and beliefs. That's how you get the privilege. This is what our culture's most powerful institutions demand. And this is how they grant privilege, which is no surprise because leftists long ago seized control of these institutions, and privilege is simply one of the spoils of victory, and it always has been. If you're on the winning side, you get the privilege. If you're not, you don't. This is the result of decades of the left invading, taking over, seizing control of the most powerful institutions in our culture. What was the right doing during that time? What were conservatives doing? Well, conservatives spent decades, of course, ignoring the leftist takeover of education and pop culture and Hollywood and media, ignoring that and instead focusing on getting Republicans elected to Congress so we could pass tax cuts and, spread democracy in the Middle East. That was conservatism's priorities for decades. That really worked out, didn't it? That worked out really well. But that's how privilege works. And that to me seems pretty obvious now. Let's move on to headlines. There is now apparently a backlash brewing against the show Paw Patrol, which is a show about cartoon dogs. Also, the show that my 3-year-old is obsessed. Every 3-year-old in the country is obsessed with Paw Patrol. Leftists are now targeting the show because of its positive portrayal of police. Now, the police are dogs in this show, but, that's a problem too, apparently. And this in spite of the fact that Paw Patrol sent out a tweet a few days ago bowing at the BLM altar, as you are required to do, and expressing their submission and obedience that is required of them. Here's a tweet from Paw Patrol. Again, this is a cartoon show about crime-fighting dogs. And this is what it says. In solidarity of Amplify Melanated Voices, we will be muting our content until June 7th to give access to black voices to be heard so we can continue to listen and further our learning. Hashtag Amplify Black Voices. And then there's a black box that says muted and listening. So this is a thing now where white people or even cartoon dogs, who are honorary white people, I suppose, are expected to stop talking so that black people can talk. Muted and listening. Now, how exactly are black people prevented from talking just because other people are talking as well? I don't know. This is a country of 330 million people. Everybody's talking all the time. You're not going to be the only one talking. Doesn't matter what your race is. I mean, how are you persecuted or oppressed by the fact that not everyone in the country is shutting up while you talk? The cartoon dogs did their part, performed the ritual, they're still going to be sacrificed because even cartoons cannot escape. Also, by the way, the show's Cops and Live PD have both been canceled. Why have they been canceled? Because of its positive depictions of police. So, this is the game, of course. The left is trying to build a narrative, has built a narrative, constructed a narrative about thug police who are villainous and violent and are out, killing people left and right. That's the narrative. And they're not going to allow for anything that contradicts that narrative. They want to make sure that anytime you see police on TV is always in a negative context. And then they can turn around and say, hey, most police are bad. Just turn on the TV. All you're ever going to see is bad police. Clearly, most police are bad. What they don't mention is that the only reason you only see bad police is because they won't allow you to see anything else other than that. Number 2, Ilhan Omar was speaking. I believe this is at a rally in Minneapolis, but I don't really know. Doesn't matter. Anyway, this is what she had to say.
What I do know is that for the last 25 years, I have lived as a black person in this country. I have lived children. So I do know what it means to be black in America. I know what our young children go through because I was an adolescent interfacing with the police department here in Minneapolis. I know my silence will contribute to complacency. And I know that none of you fought so hard to get me elected so that I can co-sign on a system that continues to oppress us.
You know, it's interesting, really. Ilhan Omar is an immigrant woman, came to this country, despises this country, despises most of its inhabitants. This is a woman just filled with contempt. You can hear it every time she speaks. She hates a lot of people in this country, really hates them. And yet, as an immigrant woman, a racial minority, quickly rose to a position of power and prominence. She's only, I think, 37 or 38 years old. One of the youngest members of Congress. She achieved that. Okay, to her credit. But the system was set up in such a way as to make it possible for her to achieve that. And now she turns around and claims to be oppressed by the very system that enabled her to get into this position. It's remarkable. And also, what is the system? You know, what are you talking about? You say the system oppresses. And yet you are oppressed by the system even as you control the system? It's, again, it's a remarkable claim, remarkable in its stupidity. Ilhan Omar, her story, her life, is proof in itself that America is not systemically racist. Same for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, same for Barack Obama. And yet these are the people who disprove systemic racism just by their story, by their existence, are the same ones who are the loudest ones claiming that systemic racism exists. And I know that, you know, I get it. It's that at least is, it's not what you would expect. Let me put it this way. If you didn't know anything about America, right? And, maybe you came here from another planet and you landed here and you sat down with a BLM activist or, you know, any leftist activist and you had them describe America to you. And you kept that in mind, and then you went out and actually looked at what's really happening in America, it would not be at all what you expected. Based on what they tell you, you would not expect to go to the capital of this country and find people like Ilhan Omar running things. You would not expect that the person who ran the country, the most powerful man in the country for 8 years, who just left office a few years ago, was a black man. You would not expect that. It's not something that would be predicted by the theory of systemic racism. And yeah, so that is pretty good evidence, I think. And if it doesn't, listen, if, you know, the ability of someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar to very easily and quickly become very powerful people in the government and culturally, both of those things, if that is not at least evidence against systemic racism, what would be evidence against it? And we know this is an unfalsifiable claim. The people who make the claim, it is unfalsifiable. There is no evidence that you could ever present, ever, that they would consider evidence against their claim. And unfalsifiable claims are illegitimate. Always. If it cannot be falsified, if there is nothing that could ever falsify it, it is not legitimate. Number 4, Natalie Portman has come out in favor of defunding the police. Very brave stuff, extremely heroic. Here's what she said on Instagram. She said, when I first heard hashtag defund the police, I have to admit my first reaction was fear. My whole life, police have made me feel safe. But that's exactly the center of my white privilege. The police make me, as a white woman, feel safe, while my black friends, family, and neighbors feel the opposite. Police make them feel terror, and for good reason. Police are the 6th leading cause of death of black men in this country. These are not isolated incidents. They are patterns and part of the system of over-policing of black Americans. Reforms have not worked. Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered, is one of the most progressive police forces in the country, having undergone extensive anti-bias training. I've gotten to the age in my life where if my gut feels uncomfortable, I take the situation as wrong. But this concept initially made me uncomfortable because I was wrong. Because the system that makes me feel uncomfortable is wrong. Okay, because the system that makes me feel comfortable is wrong. Okay, she's saying, if I felt comfortable with it as a white person, then I would know that it's wrong. Here's what she's saying, that I know my gut instinct is wrong because I'm white. My God. Have some self-respect. Get a hold of yourself. What the hell is wrong with you people? Well, I know because I'm white, I can't trust anything I think. I am just scum. I am dirt. Whatever I think must be wrong. Of course, much of what she said here is completely wrong. She says that police are the 6th leading cause of death for black men in this country. That's false. Not true. Here are the top 6 leading causes of death for black men in this country, according to the CDC. Heart disease, cancer, unintentional injury, homicide, stroke, and diabetes. Police are not on the list. So that is simply false. Totally false. She says these are not isolated incidents. They are. George Floyd is an isolated incident. There were 9 unarmed black men killed by police last year. In a country of 330 million, I would call that an isolated incident. Yeah. I mean, that's almost as isolated as it can get. And then, but here's the real irony here. She says that because of her privilege, because she is aware of her privilege, she is supporting defund the police. But no, that is a very privileged point of view. She is an extremely wealthy woman living in a very rich neighborhood. I'm assuming a gated community. She can afford personal security. I guarantee she has personal security when she goes out and about. So she's not going to be affected by this. You want to talk about privilege? You as a rich person who can afford around the clock 24-hour personal security, very few people can afford that. You can. So you as a rich person saying, yeah, let's defund the police. Let's take the police out of these poor communities. So that mothers and families are going to have nobody to call in the event of them being victims of crime. You want to talk about privileged? That's the privileged perspective. If you want to defy your privilege or take a position contrary to your privilege, then you would say that, hey, listen, even though I'm rich and I can afford personal security, I know most people can't. And so that's why I support the police, because by and large, in the vast majority of cases, they are protecting people, black, white, or otherwise. And I think that poor people in these communities deserve to be protected. They deserve to have law enforcement. They shouldn't be, I don't want to see these communities burned to the ground and in the grips of chaos and anarchy. I don't want to see it. Even though it doesn't affect me because I'm rich, I don't want to see it. So if you really cared about seeing past your privilege, that would be the position you would take. There's so much going on in the news this year. Hard to know where to even begin in trying to sort through all of it. And then, of course, you have the left-wing media constantly lying about it and pushing their agenda. You can't trust them. I mean, speaking of that, the radicals, the insurrectionists in Seattle that have set up their own sovereign state in the middle of a city, taken over city blocks, this is basically not being reported by the mainstream media. There's very little about it. Now, compare that to what happened when you had some armed militiamen, right-wingers, in, where was it, in Oregon? A few years ago, they took over some uninhabited plot of land in the middle of nowhere. Nobody was around. The media freaked out. The left freaked out. And now you've got insurrectionists in the middle of a city taking it over, and there's nothing. So that's just an example of left-wing bias.